Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Novel at Home. We are about 6 months into doing virtual events. I never thought we'd still be doing virtual events and not able to host them in the store, but here we are. We're so grateful. I know that there's a lot that we're competing with all of the pandemic programming that you have access to, so we're grateful that you're joining us tonight. We're all getting ready for a little bit of a debate later, so we'll get through this and wrap in plenty of time. We are super excited. We have got Jared J.B. Boyd with us and David A. Less. We are here to celebrate the launch of Memphis Mayhem. Jared is a multimedia journalist, artist, humorist, and on-air personality dedicated to telling stories that intersect the identity of people in the Southern United States, members of the hip-hop cultural gaze, and the elusive millennial cool. That's one of the coolest bios I've ever read. He is arts and culture columnist at the Daily Memphian and program manager for WYXR 91.7 FM, which I highly recommend. Listen to it all day as I work from home today.
Thank you so much.
And, you know, we're here to celebrate the author and music historian, David A. Less, who has studied Memphis music for over 40 years and has conducted research for the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Gibson Guitar Foundation. His work has appeared in Rolling Stone, Downbeat, Blues Review magazine, and the Bulletin for the Society of American Music. Most importantly, he's a third generation Memphian who still lives in Memphis, Tennessee. And so grateful for the work you've done to record the rich history that Memphis music has. I credit Memphis music with being the reason I am here. My family is originally from Pittsburgh. My dad got transferred here for his job. And my parents had, my brother and I were about 4 and 6 when we moved here, and said, well, what should we do? What is there to do in Memphis? And someone told them, go hear music, go to Blues Alley. And so they took us, and they loved it. And, Memphis music and musicians are such a neat family and tribe. They welcomed us with open arms. I would bring my Cabbage Patch Kid and my Berenstain Bears books. And I thought that Little Laura Dukes and Ben Colley were my personal friends. And we did end up making lifelong friends with a lot of the band members. And so when my dad got transferred to Charlotte, after 2 years, my mom said, Joe, you better get transferred back to Memphis because we're going without you. We miss it so much. And pardon me, at that point, Blues Alley was closed, but Lou's Place had opened. And so we spent years there until it closed. And so, yeah, my brother's a musician. I love Memphis music and everything it does for us. And so thank you so much for doing what you've done to keep its history alive. And with that, I'll turn this over to you guys. If everyone wants to take a look at the top or bottom of your screen, you will see there's a Q&A box. There's also a chat box. And for chat, you can do shout outs, you can do comments, whatever. If you have a specific question you'd like to ask, you can enter it in the Q&A box, and I will pop back up at the end to read these guys your questions. All right, thanks, and take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's see, David, can you hear me in here?
Boy, I can hear you. And
all right, there we go.
Oh, boy, when Memphis gets a hold of you, it doesn't let you go, does it?
Well, this is a unique opportunity for me, and thank you for picking me to have this conversation with you. I always really take it very seriously when an author makes any effort for me to have their book in hand before it comes out. That's really extremely special to me, but also just to be able to spend the time to talk with you. And, I find it such a fantastic honor and pleasure to be on the other side of someone who interviews people so expertly. And so I hope that I can do that experience justice in your eyes.
Well, no, listen, one of us has to be cool, so it's you. Congratulations, man, because I appreciate you taking time to do this. I really do, and I couldn't think of a better person to do it. I'm happy that you agreed to do this.
Thank you. Well, I'd love if we could, before even talking about the book specifically, if we could sort of delve into you and your story, and as was mentioned earlier, you're a third generation Memphian, which this book really shares a lot of perspectives about how and why people end up here. And I take it that you are able to sort of share a bit of a deeper narrative of how your family has been here over time, and what that means to your experience and how that colors your perspective.
Well, my grandparents on my fraternal side got here. My grandfather got here in the 1907, 8, early 1900s, and also my maternal grandmother too. They all came at the same time. So, they came, and like I said, Memphis really takes a hold of you. I've lived other places over the years, but always come back here. My grandparents had a store. We're Jewish, and I tell a story in the book about my father's parents getting burned out of their store in Arkansas by the KKK. So there's a lot of shared experience, quite different than the African American experience, obviously. But there's a chapter in there that talks about Jewish people, Black people, and white people. And although Jews are Caucasian and we are white, it's somewhere between the two. I think I liken it to if one side of the coin is head and one side is tails, Jews are kind of the coin set sitting on its side, because we do have our share of issues with discrimination and with hatred as well. And unfortunately, much in the same way it is now, racism hasn't gone away and anti-Semitism hasn't gone away. And it's really come to light recently that those two issues are still probably as deep as they ever have been.
Growing up here, we've had several conversations in the months leading up to this. For those who don't know, I don't know that we've made any sort of formal announcement that people should be able to expect that you will have a special program running occasionally on WYXR 91.7 FM, not directly connected to this text, but definitely will have some overlap with the characters that we know just from being a part of this community, and for those who aren't a part of this community, from being global citizens. There's so many interesting people who are both in this book, who are both who are also our neighbors rather, and who are also a part of your show. So people should look forward to that, because it will be spectacular. I've heard what you've been working on.
Well, you just announced it, so.
There it is.
Yeah.
I made an executive decision.
Good.
Do you remember a time that you had any sort of first inclination that there was a cachet that came along with being a Memphian and the impact that this city has had on culture as a young person, particularly?
I had to go away to college to really sort of begin to understand that. When I grew up here, I thought that every town had a version of Elvis Presley. I thought that every town you'd run into Isaac Hayes at the grocery store. I thought every town had Rufus Thomas on the radio. I had no inkling whatsoever that there was anything special about Memphis at all. And then I went away to school at Ohio State, and boy, it came crashing down at that point when I went to Ohio. The differences between the music there, music here, and just the overall cultures. And really, by the time I lived in New York after college, and lived in Atlanta, in Austin, Texas, I had lived a couple of other places. It took that to really recognize that that there is something special here, and there's something going on. And I started studying the music at that point.
your book, it starts off with a really strong thesis, and it sort of wears that thesis on its sleeve and is cohesive in a way that a lot of other texts similar to this maybe aren't, in that you've identified sort of these three watershed moments in which Memphis has truly been at the helm of impacting the world. And I think you and I both agree on a lot of things in this book. There are a lot of sentiments that I can take away from it and say, yeah, extremely spot on. And there are other parts where I think our perspectives maybe they take separate routes and sort of meet each other in different places, and then they come back or what. And it's sort of I know because of what I read in the book, I guess I haven't voiced all of it to you, and we talked a bit about it, but I'd like to sort of explore those three moments because I 100% agree on those being watershed moments. And so I think that if you're a human and if you've been paying attention, you will also agree that, Memphis has impacted the world in these three ways. And there may be some others, FedEx and AutoZone and that kind of thing. But as far as music is concerned and culture, I think the obvious one, as many will understand, is what happened in 1968 at the Lorraine Motel, the shot that is heard around the world, the assassination of Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, not necessarily a direct event that is musical, but the space and the place and the time and what is going on is definitely connected to music, I think, in a way. A man who asked to hear a song just moments before.
Right. And the Lorraine was
start with that one?
Well, the Lorraine was a place where the Stax producers and musicians hung out, songwriters. Songs were written there. The owners were very sympathetic to Memphis music and very involved. Lorraine Motel was named for Sweet Lorraine, the song. So there is a musical thing. I mean, the three things you're talking about, and by the way, we don't agree on everything, which is one of the reasons I appreciate you doing this. And one of the reasons I asked you, because I don't want another old white guy asking me questions about stuff and agreeing with me, because obviously, dialogue needs to have, that. So I appreciate that you don't agree with everything or that you have a different perspective. But the three instances you're talking about, the first one is in the early 1900s when W.C. Handy notated blues music. And by the way, all three of them have to do with race in America. And history was forever changed as a result. So the first being the notation of the blues, because at that time, before phonograph records were really ubiquitous, the way that music was disseminated across the country, certainly, and across the world, was through sheet music. Everybody had a parlor piano, could play piano, and that's how music got out. And notating what was ultimately a regional African-American musical form by Mr. Handy and sending it out across the world, it really became the bedrock of the world's music. I mean, it's not just American music, but you hear blues everywhere. It's all over Western music. The second, of course, was Elvis Presley, and this is where we diverge, I guess, a little bit, taking what was essentially black music and jumping it up and making jump blues out of it, and making a precursor to rock and roll with rockabilly. And of course, the third you mentioned was Dr. King. And all three of them have to do with race. All three happened in Memphis, which is a small market ultimately. And the course of human history was changed forever as a result of those three things.
Could we unpack a bit more of the musicality of the Lorraine Motel and that locale, and what that meant to South Memphis and downtown, right on that edge of South Memphis and downtown? Could we talk a bit more? Could you share a bit more from a historical perspective for those who don't know how important that hotel was to Black entertainers who came through this area?
Well, it was, at that time, there was still segregation, and black entertainers had to stay separate. Even if they toured, the marquees would have to go in different restaurants, you know, in the 60s. Now, by 68, theoretically, that was over. But in Memphis, it was only theoretical. And black performers, for the most part, had to find places they could stay. And the Lorraine was a place that was welcoming to people coming in to record, to play at the Club Paradise, to work at Stax. You know, it was a very important cultural place. There was a hotel on Beale Street called Mickey Clark's. And of course, Mitchell's Hotel on Beale Street, which later became Club Handy. You know, these were historically black lodging. And it was basically in that same, you know, tradition of black lodging. But they did allow Steve Cropper, Duck Dunn. It wasn't just black performers. It was the white performers and white staff and white producers who all were able to, in a safe way, prior to 1968 and throughout the 60s, to intermingle and have meals together, write songs together. Even as silly as it sounds, a swimming pool, you know, they all hung out at the pool. They all had fun together. And I think that was a crucial place for that reason, for many reasons, but that's one of them.
A social club, more than just a place to lay your head.
Absolutely. Absolutely was, yeah.
Can we talk about that other watershed moment, or the next, at least on my list, and we're jumping a bit through chronology, and I have my own reasons for that, but based mainly on my curiosities. You know, the moment that Handy notates the blues, as it were, or as one might call it, and you make a distinction in your book to recognize the fact that well into the late 60s, a lot of this music, as it is felt and as it is performed and as it is danced to and enjoyed, is more fluid than what many people would like to do as far as classifying it and giving it a genre or format of that nature. Could you talk about why that moment was important from your perspective, the moment that Handy writes down music?
Well, I mean,
music, rather.
Well, I don't actually believe that the music just kind of leaps out from anywhere. I think it comes from different places and different sources, and it culminates, and occasionally it'll culminate in a specific moment. So I think my theory is the Handy Band and the Buddy Bolton Band in New Orleans probably had similar instrumentation and similar repertoire. Of course, Buddy Bolton being the New Orleans claim to, you know, jazz beginning in New Orleans. But I think they were probably pretty similar. I think that the moment that he notated it is important, not that he discovered blues. Certainly, he didn't. And it had been around probably by that time, you know, 10 or 15 years as a regional form. But that he recognized it and that he notated it and was able to disseminate it, you know, across the world. And as a result, I mean, if you wake up a jazz player today, the most avant-garde jazz player in the world, and say, what is jazz? They're going to say blues.
The blues,
it's,
right?
It is the heart of everything. Right. And without his having done that, eventually it probably would have happened because it's too powerful not to. But the fact that he did it, the fact that it happened in Memphis, you know, rock and roll probably would have been invented somewhere else.
Right.
But the fact that it happened here, I think, is what's significant.
You know, it's funny, the things that you remember and the things that you sort of, someone can say something and it opens a passageway to something you haven't thought about in years. I remember being a child and seeing Handy's House for the first time on Beale, and hearing that a black man had given people the opportunity, essentially, to sort of write their own place into history with music. You know, this music that was so colloquial and such an oral tradition, having someone with the presence of mind to say now is the time to document this in a way that doesn't undermine or negate the fact that, you know, singing it to someone in a field or taking it to church with me and letting it live through that oral tradition isn't wrong, but being able to couple that with some sort of record, document, change my perspective as a young person.
Yeah, if you read Handy's biography, he recognized the financial aspects of it.
That's where I was headed.
Yeah, he recognized that there was money to be made. And I don't think it was totally altruistic on his part to let's help you know, this African American musical form become something. But he recognized that it was something, and he saw people making money on it. And you know, there's a famous story of the band playing and tips being equal to, you know, the greater than what his orchestra made that night. So he recognized that, and I think, you know, I think that's part of the story. I mean, it is a story. It's not a series of events. The history of Memphis music is a story.
Right.
I think that's part of it.
Well, you say that that's not altruism, but from my perspective, and again, I guess I should be interviewing you and not making declarations.
No, it's a conversation.
Yeah, in my perspective, for a community that has been disenfranchised as greatly as that community then, that Black community then, and me as a great-grandson and great-great-grandson of that community, to use any leverage to find some sort of balancing, to level a playing field as far as currency is considered, I imagine that that was revolutionary in that sense, and to think of Memphis as a place that could have and should have retained the sort of infrastructure that Nashville or Atlanta has afforded with ASCAP and BMI and all those sorts of things, for something of that nature to start right on Beale Street, the publishing industry of popular music. And, for us to start there and to not have that same infrastructure now, all of the spoils of being able to perform live and to share music, but not that same sort of business.
Well, you know, I stopped the book in terms of the story. The book continues through contemporary times, really, in terms of references to what's going on in Memphis now and Black Lives Matter, for that matter. You know, it concludes with, you know, with recent events that was finished over a year ago. So it's not, and things change every minute. So it's not that, but ultimately I had to find a stopping point for the story. And to me, the stopping point for the story was the change in the record industry. And the change in the record industry itself was not based upon an abandonment of Memphis. You know, after the late 70s, 1980s, the industry itself changed. And of course, Stax went out of business, catalog was sold, High Records was sold, Chips Moman moved his studio out of town. All that happened in the 70s. And it doesn't end there for that reason. It ends there because the industry itself changed. And it's, you know, the cart before the horse. Did those things happen because the industry changed, or did the industry change, you know, make those things? But I think that the story, it stops because those entities didn't abandon Memphis. They abandoned, as a business decision, they said, we're going to New York for business, we're going to LA for production, and we're going to Nashville for country music, because you can't lodge country music out of Nashville. And those were the three centers. So they closed Detroit, Philadelphia, Memphis, Atlanta, which is open. But all of those places used to have very thriving music scenes within the industry, and they didn't after 1980. Sure. And I think it was actually liberating for us. We weren't searching for a hit, man. We were just making music. You know,
well, there was.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, we had a lot of people who had been on hit records and a lot of very skillful musicians, and we had the greatest producers in studio, and you know, we had everything we needed to make great music, except the possibility of hit records. So it was not like we're not going to make music. We're still going to play music, and it's still going to be of the same high quality. It's just a question of we're not selling millions of copies anymore. So I think it's been a blessing and a curse, you know.
I appreciate that perspective. I was going to make the joke that we did get our last gasp with what Disco Duck and Ring My Bell, although, you know, Ring My Bell was recorded in Jackson, Mississippi, but it was a young lady from Memphis and some other stacks and connections and some other things in the
Disco
background.
Duck was, I think, 1970s, wasn't it?
Well, that end part going into that last gasp before that.
Well, but see, punk music came after that, and we had a huge in place. You know, punk music was really a big deal here, and of a very high quality, and really important. I mean, what Alex Chilton was doing, what Jim Dickinson was doing, Tav Falco, a group called the Clits. I mean, those were all, you know, really serious additions to the punk repertoire, and very innovative.
Sure. I'd piggyback on what you said about liberating. I think that you only get that with a community that has been liberated in some way from any kind of infrastructure, any kind of thought that there was a rule you had to follow or a place you had to fit in.
Yeah, I suspect that the producers and musicians whose income was taken away would rather not be liberated, but it was, in a sense, it was you know, I was here. I mean, I was part of the community, and it allowed a lot of experimentation and a lot of rules breaking as a result of that.
So you mentioned Detroit and Philadelphia and all these other strongholds of really unique American sounds, and I wish that we would have riffed a bit there. And so if we could go back and talk about geography, you know, earlier we talked about Buddy Bolden, and I think so often about geography in the terms of the movement of peoples out of the South, Black peoples particularly out of the South, up and down the Mississippi and elsewhere nearby, those other kind of tributary cities. Chicago, not on the Mississippi, but still has that influence. St. Louis still has that influence in that Chitlin circuit. Can we talk more about what made Memphis such a specific place? You know, even you go back to the chartering of Memphis and how is it important for people who settled then? And then you in the book, you set up that context, and then you delve deeper into that sort of tension, that push and that pull between race. And it really started early on, as you know, just after slavery and just after this city was founded. And, you know, we're celebrating the 201st year now. So can we talk a bit more about place? And because I see some of the things in your book, even as I look out my window, honestly, I'm right near where some of these things happen. So.
Well, I mean, that's the thing in Memphis. You can't, you know, go down the street without tripping over something significant musically that happened there, because so much did happen here. You know, my earliest reference in the book is around 1803, and I talk about the camp meetings, which were religious meetings that were in Kentucky and throughout the South, and they were interracial attempts at saving the soul, and they were like rock festivals. 20,000 people. I mean, you know, blacks and whites together praying and making music together up until the Civil War, when it became not okay. And then after the Civil War, you know, everything knows what happened there. But after that point, when the yellow fever comes through here, we had what was a metropolitan area that was built up and was really a place that people came for commerce and trade. They sold things here. It was a, you know, as to the extent that you can be in the 1870s, a metropolis. Mm-hmm. And when the yellow fever epidemics hit, the white people who could afford to leave, and anybody who could afford to leave, basically left. And it created a racial imbalance. And as a result of that racial imbalance, when the yellow fever was over, we lost our charter. It didn't get it back until 1892. You know, it's like I use the analogy, you know, starting to dance and stepping off on your left foot. You're kind of stumbling through racial relations for 100 years or so. Mm-hmm. And I think that affected, you know, that's why this sense of place, that's why Memphis is unique. And I've had people tell me, I have friends who are my age, and I'll ask this question to you. I have many African-American friends my age who said racism in Memphis is different. It's unique. They've told me this over the years. And I don't know if because of our age difference, you know, you're much younger, obviously, and you would have a different perspective as a Black man than those people, than those friends of mine who have told me this over the years. Is it different here?
Well, sorry, I was getting an email right there. And I didn't know if that was the end of your question. It covered your eyes a little bit. I didn't know if it was the sort of punctuate a sentence with your eyes. I couldn't see just a bit for a second. Yeah, is it different? I guess I also kind of zoned out and started to think about other places that I've been, other places I've lived. For people who may not know my biography, I went to the University of Mississippi, which is shocking for some people that I would make a decision like that. And I made a decision based on where I thought that I could get a true and pure gauge of where America is right now, where the South is right now. And as an 18-year-old, I thought that doesn't frighten me. That is something that I want to do. So I want to seek out that challenge of being in a place in the cradle of not only white America, but Black America. A lot of people think of Ole Miss and they think, oh, okay, this is based on what has happened there. And I've met with James Meredith and I've interviewed James Meredith and I've been in his space and had conversations with him and looked at history in the face. But as white as anyone may think Mississippi is, it is very, very Black on the other side of that track. And so those Black boys and girls, men and women, have to go to a school as well. And so you may not see them at the football games when you look at ESPN, but they're in the student union when you go and grab something to eat, they're in your classroom, so I wanted to really get a true gauge of where things were, because as an 18-year-old leaving out of programs in Memphis like Bridge Builders and Facing History and Ourselves, I was pumped up way up here about being able to leave after 40 years and say, okay, there's room for this community to grow, or okay, I've left and I have the knowledge that I can share that things have changed. I've lived in Mobile, Alabama, and I've been many places. I will say that the energy of racism in Memphis, or race relations in Memphis, apropos to your book, I think are very much centered around venues where there's cross-cultural cachet. And music is number one. Sports might be number two. And the goings and comings of working class life might be number three. I think that music is that medicine in a lot of ways that might get two people who have completely different walks of life on the same page. And Memphis is one of those places where there's so much music to choose from, so much of a musical influence to interact with, that, hell, look at us, you and I right now.
Well, my friend Jim Dickinson once said, and I'll paraphrase, that music has done more to bring us together than any politicians or religious leaders or anyone else, to bring the races together. And music has done that, has been that bridge in a way that that those other sources have failed. And there's a quote in the book from 1953 from the guy in Alabama who was the head of the Southern white, gotta beat 'em up crowd, whatever that is. And he said, rock and roll is the worst way it's going to lead to the mixing of the races. Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I'd say this, and I want to make sure that I make it clear, is that I don't mean to share that with some kumbaya kind of view. I think the music gets the people in the same forum, but that doesn't alleviate the opportunity for people to still get off on the wrong foot. And this book truly reveals that. I can speak from my personal experience. I have been patronized before, and I've been offended before with music as a vehicle by, allowing someone to think that they might, they could maybe cross a boundary with me, using the music as an opportunity to say, oh, no, I get you. I understand you. This is what your experience is like, So it goes both ways, but otherwise, we wouldn't be at the same table in the same room or in the same party or in the same, dancing to the same beat, for us to have that friction to be able to take the opportunity to learn. And so I think it might be worth noting, and you mentioned earlier, Memphis, by virtue of having so many unique entry points through that medium, is unique in a way that other places aren't. Like you mentioned, for one Memphian talk to another, you might say, oh, well, no brainer, music brings people together. But there isn't music of this caliber everywhere to be able to start that conversation.
No, absolutely not. And the poster child for interracial bands was Booker T and the MGs in the 60s, 1961. Although it was 64, they became fully integrated. But, when they became two white guys and two black guys.
Sure. I understand. I understand. Mr. Steinberg I grew up in church with Mr. Steinberg. Right?
But musicians were playing together, black and white musicians were playing together long before that. Club Handy and certainly at High Records, they were recording together. So it's not like we just woke up and said, this is a common language. It's been part of the DNA, and it continues to be. I mean, I think it still continues to be a part of that.
Well, let's talk about possibly the elephant in the room, the one man who everyone all over the world, little babies come out knowing this man's name, and all you have to say is the one name, Elvis Presley, and his presence in your text. That's the last sort of watershed. Was Sam Phillips and Elvis Presley and all that's going on in Sun really takes a stage in this book as a place where a recording service is able to really create a new language, a common language that is almost equally, as African-American as it is white, Southern American, in a sense that this new spin on R&B, this new sort of funnel for which America is able to view youth culture is based based in blackness, but given a sort of a white veneer in many senses, if that language is fair. Could you talk about instances in this text that you think most reveal that, and also just your thoughts there as we talk today?
Well, I think I made a comment in the book that people say that Elvis stole black music.
Right.
My comment was that, in fact, black music stole Elvis because he was headed to being a crooner like Dean Martin, and the music took him in different places and made something else from him. I don't think you agree with that, and I'll give you an opportunity to tell me why. And I'm not sure I agree with it incidentally, by the way. I think it's an observation, but the book is not the truth. It's my story. Mm-hmm. And there are other stories. And I say in the introduction, this is not, there are other versions of this story. This is just kind of my take on it. And it's intended not to be a history, or certainly not a definitive history or anything like that. It is a story. It's called a story as opposed to a history. So take it for that. But, I think that what happened with Elvis and Sam Phillips in that studio really could not have happened elsewhere. I think rock and roll would have been different had it not been for that. Sam Phillips had a long history with black music. He had hit records. And prior to Elvis and prior to that, if he never made rock and roll, he would be a very famous and influential record producer for having produced all the things that he produced on Howlin' Wolf and Little Milton. You just go on and on. The list is forever of the people that he discovered and produced. And another producer, and if Elvis were in Nashville, if Elvis were in Philadelphia, if Elvis were in LA, and he started goofing around with black music, they'd say, okay, let's get back to the other stuff. I mean, it's more than likely, but Sam, much like Handy, recognized the financial opportunities because he'd made money with black music. So it wasn't a question necessarily of let's change the world. I don't think people go into things to think they're going to change the world. I think they change the world by their actions, but not necessarily by their intentions. And, you know, the fact that we had a pressing plant here, you know, we had an infrastructure here. We had Poplar Tunes, which was really, really influential in terms of getting music out. Jukeboxes were an important way that music was put out. We had Dewey Phillips. We had a radio station and a disc jockey who was attuned to it. We had WDIA. I mean, there were so many things. You could press the record, you could distribute the record, you could get it on the radio. You had so many opportunities that it's almost like a petri dish. I
Right.
mean, it all worked out right. And I think that's why I say that the music stole him, where all of those circumstances brought him to where he was and made him go.
You know, and it's funny when you talk about this ethnic mix, and Memphis isn't always sort of given a credit for the sort of like ethnic mix that a place like New Orleans might be. You know, when you think of Creole culture and the Bayou and Cajun, that sort of stuff. But you definitely look at the business of popular music, and you see, like, you know, the Italian families represented, the Lucchese's and the Novareses. Of course, you know, the Black men and women who are represented, and it's a family affair. I think we were talking a bit before we went live about how, you know, there's the link between this soul music and the hip hop that has bridged us over to today. White Americans and Jewish Americans really being all on the same page with the green of the money that was being able to be made. And so it's a really unique perspective. What do you make of that great American melting pot? I know we just touched on it a bit, but do you want to go into more detail when you speak ethnically about how that makeup looks?
Well, they call it the music business, you know, and I think people who are serious approach it that way. You know, professionals make their living doing what they do, and otherwise they're amateurs. Now, I talked earlier about the liberating independence of, you know, the business going away, and there are people who are able to survive that. A lot of them had to go to Nashville. You know, half of Nashville, every drummer in Nashville started in Memphis, it seems like. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Muscle Shoals and different places that they had to go for recording centers. Of course, Memphis was a great recording center too, obviously, but, you know, they had to go different places to continue. So I think that certainly the business of, you know, when you talk about the green, when that went away, we would love to have that back. And I think it is coming back, by the way, from what I can tell. I'm way too old to know it, other than from the fringes. But I know that there are hip hop artists and rap artists here who are doing quite well and have resurrected a lot of industry here. And you know, it's not that I don't know about them, and it's not that I'm unaware of them, but I'm not participating in the industry in that sort. So that's why I can't speak intelligently about what they're doing. But the industry is coming back. It's just morphed. It's right. Just changed. And
I can confirm two things. One that might surprise you is that I'm already out of touch with what's going on in hip hop here, as I've been sort of working backwards to sort of retrace our steps as far as soul and rock and roll has been concerned. I've already found myself not being able to keep up. But two, yes, absolutely. I think that Memphis is once again the most influential city in music as far as just sheer impact on how other people are making their music. I know that the largest artists are taking cues from what Memphis artists were doing in the 90s. And I know that there are Memphis artists who are working now to directly impact some of the biggest artists in the industry or are their contemporaries already. So that is a fact. And there's one really interesting point in your book. There's many, many interesting points, but one thing that we talked about earlier on the phone is the impact of Brown versus Board of Education on the way that bands were made up. I mean, you can look at all the labels that we think of when we think about Memphis, whether that be the garage bands on Go Wax, or whether that be, you know, Booker T, well, not to the extent of Booker T, just Barcades, of course, you know, the Newcomers, the Mad Lads, all of these bands that were essentially school friends who played instruments together and grew up playing together and grew up getting to know the other people in their neighborhood who played instruments, spending time together. And that was a pastime, was being able to learn an instrument. That is not necessarily, not only do young people who go to schools here in this community, maybe not necessarily all the time live in the same neighborhood, thanks to integration and the impact of that. But the music programs don't support that in the same way, and the rivalries, and being able to be in your school jazz band or learning from middle school all the way up with the same friends that you walk to the bus with, and that sort of thing. Could you share a bit more about that perspective and how that outside moment in U.S. history impacted or created a new problem with music that maybe was not a foreseen, symptom of a change like that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one of the unknown heroes of Memphis music, and there are many who people have never heard of, many people have never heard of, is Dub Jenkins. And Dub Jenkins was a student. Everyone knows Jimmy Lunsford started the first band program at Manassas and took his students and made a top band out of them, merged them with some students from Fisk, and became, the Jimmy Lunsford Orchestra, and had a huge success. Moved them to New York and had big success. What they don't know is their students at Booker T. Washington at the same time in the 20s started a band under Dub Jenkins and his playmates. And they were contemporary with and competitors with Jimmy Lunsford Band. And they were the popular band as well. And I think that because of that, Manassas and Booker T. Washington, which were, I believe, the first two black high schools, created a sense of rivalry, which was really, really healthy, not only in music, but in sports. And it brought those communities together, It was all neighborhoods, it was communities, and those kids all grew up and they went to, elementary, middle school, high school, they all graduated together, and they all took band together under these great band leaders, W.T. McDaniel and Andy Goodrich and, Emerson Abel, and, the history we have of Matthew Garrett, of great black band leaders teaching in the schools was really significant. A lot of people have forgotten something called ballet, and ballet was in Booker T. Washington. And it was an annual event, and it was a competition, but it was described like it was a New York Broadway show. They had dancers, they had comics, and of course they had the battles of the bands, and they were fierce, and they practiced hard, they learned hard. It was a sense of pride, and they got better. They all got better, and they became really serious musicians. And as a result of that, that was really significant. I think that the last one of those great high school bands that came up together is the Bar-Kays. And I said James Alexander is a hero, and I believe James to be a hero for many reasons. But he came through that school system, playing with people, from junior high all the way through. And it really became an important part of the development. After that, when they started integrating the schools, it changed. And when they started busing, all those neighborhood kids weren't in the same bands. They weren't practicing together after school. They weren't playing together on the weekends. And that was something that was lost. The other thing is the notion of families, because so many of these people I interviewed, parents were musicians, and they often would play with older people. James told me that when he was 12, 13 years old, grown men would come pick him up and he'd come play bass. He said, I couldn't play anything but Mary Had a Little Lamb, but they put me on the bandstand with them and I'd play with them. And there's countless examples of that, of really school-age kids who got to play with grown men and women, but men, truthfully, because that's what the bands were. And it was an opportunity for them to learn professionalism. It was an opportunity for them to learn music. And it was a big part of the development of what happened here and why it was so good, why the music here was so good.
I think that we have to break for Q&A before we close out for the hour, but I want to highlight another of my favorite parts of the book that's such a simple, you know, just a concept of how Memphis and Memphis's soul, Memphis's rock, left an indelible impression on what became the British invasion, as it is dubbed. Is it giving away too specific of an anecdote to revisit that short passage from your words?
No, not at all. You want me to read it?
No, read it. I just there's sort of three separate short anecdotes, and people may have read before about Carla Thomas being in London and Paul McCartney coming to see her, but I had never heard anything about John Lennon fawning is light of word, I won't say nearly, sexually harassing Miss Ann People, as I read it at least, and picturing it in my head. And also the fascinating story about the Cunningham brother who spent some time with Paul McCartney. So I just wanted you to share it through your words.
Well, I mean, I think that it was really significant. Certainly the impact of Memphis music on the British invasion can't be underscored. And Keith Richards is quoted as saying that when he heard Heartbreak Hotel on Radio Liechtenstein, the next morning he woke up a different guy. I mean, it changed his life. John Lennon said, without Elvis, there's no Beatles. Blair Cunningham, who you're referencing, was a drummer from the famous Cunningham family of drummers, and they were great drummers. And he's a younger one, and he was in London, I think, trying to find his way as a drummer, and he was successful enough. And Paul McCartney was looking for a drummer and had him come out to audition. Now, this is a story I heard. I didn't hear it from Blair Cunningham, so it's a rumor, it's a story. But apparently Blair Cunningham went out to McCartney's estate, and the two of them were playing as he was auditioning for McCartney. And McCartney was on guitar and he was on drums, and they played together for a couple hours. And allegedly, Cunningham said to Paul McCartney, "Man, if we could find a good bass player, we'd have a good band." Well, of course, McCartney was a bass player in the Beatles and one of the most famous, But that's not to say that Blair Cunningham didn't know the Beatles. Obviously he did. But the point was, he knew Beatles music, but everything that happened around here was so much more influential on him and more important. Especially his brother was one of the ones who died in the plane crash with Otis Redding. So he grew up around musicians and that. And again, not to embarrass Blair Cunningham for not knowing that Paul McCartney was the bassist in the Beatles, but it just kind of gives you an inkling of what this really means, what the music means to everybody worldwide.
Well, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole. I'm truly honored, Dave, that you would have me.
Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. This has been amazing. We do have a few questions from the audience. George Newton asks, David, how long ago did you decide to start working on this project? Was there any particular inspiration that led you down this road?
Well, the book started taking form in 1976, if you can believe that. I started doing research for the National Endowment for the Humanities on Memphis music. And I always thought, at that time, there was not a lot of research being done on Memphis music. It was, Stax was about to close. It was a pretty gray area, pretty gray time. But I felt like there needed to be, I knew what was going on, the history. And I felt there needed to be a history written. And I always thought it would be a history. But then as I did more research and worked on it over the years and years and years, I realized that two things. One is I didn't want to write a history because it would be extremely boring if I just wrote the history of Memphis music. And I didn't want to tell everything I know because nobody would want to read that. So I didn't need to rewrite. And during that time, more research was done. There were books on Stax done. Robert Gordon did a great book. Rob Bowman did a great book. My friend Peter Goronick, who wrote the forward, has done many books on Elvis and Sam Phillips and Memphis. And there was no reason to rewrite that. So it kind of came to me probably 3 or 4 years ago that what I really should write is the story of Memphis music, and talk about those events rather than as a history, as a component of the overall story. And it was somewhat liberating because I didn't need to be chronological. I didn't need to write 10,000 pages. I didn't need to bore everybody to death. Hopefully I didn't. And the book, you know, really tells that story as a story. We're Southerners, we're storytellers. That's what we do.
Absolutely. And it's amazing what you're able to cover. I think it clocks in just over 200 pages.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's amazing what you're able to pack in there. Let's see here. We've got Barbara Christensen. Can you talk about the impact of the church, where so many of our youth who get their training wheels in becoming accomplished musicians? She has a second question too, which may be more for your publisher. Is there a reason why you didn't include an index in your book?
We didn't include an index in the book because people don't read them, is what I was told. So to answer the second question first, that's what I understand. People really don't look at indexes, and hopefully the book's short enough that you can find what you need in there anyway. And the first question was about the church. You know, Memphis, the Church of God in Christ started here in 1907, and gospel music really is based on Pentecostal and a lot of the changes that occurred with the Church of God in Christ. Of course, a lot of those occurred in Chicago and different places, but the church was here, and Arizona Drains was a person who brought the boogie woogie piano in. I mean, there's a whole litany of how that music crept in and eventually became soul music through Ray Charles. You know, although that's not necessarily stated in the book, but Ray Charles, I would think, in my opinion, created soul music when he merged gospel music with rhythm and blues. So there's a history of gospel music here that started with Kojic, and you know, Sister Rosetta Tharpe is from 80 miles away from here, you know, very close. Arizona Drains was a very important part of the book and part of the story too. Does that answer it? Maybe?
I think so.
Okay.
And I think the only one, let's see. I've got Sheldon Peterson says, David, you haven't mentioned your own contributions to the music through your own record label. Says from Sheldon.
Hi, Sheldon. Well, my own contributions are very minuscule, and basically the book sort of stops in terms of the story with punk music in the 80s and the industry abandoning Memphis. Again, as the industry abandoned Memphis, music didn't abandon it, and it hasn't gotten worse, by the way. It's a fantasy to think that we are a legacy musical town. We are not. It is still an important part of the city and of the DNA of our musicians. Well, I started a record label called Memphis International Records in 2001, and it is still going on. It's now owned by members of the Phillips family, Sam Phillips family, and we produced records. And basically, what we said was, we're going to produce records on, my business partner is Bob Merlis, a publicist out of Los Angeles. And we decided that we were not going to be genre specific. We were going to make records that we like and not worry about, you know, we can be ignored in many genres. So I guess that's the story of Memphis International Records.
I've got one last one that I think is more of a comment, but we've got Bobby Lavelle, who says, I was born in Memphis, graduated from Manassas. My dad, Bob Honeymoon Garner, took me to Club Handy when I was a child, long before I became a musician. I have to date played with Ray Charles, B.B. King, Jimmy Heath, Slide Hampton, Ron Carter's Great Big Band, Duke Ellington Orchestra, and others. He's got a band, Bobby Lavelle Jazz Orchestra, and studied with Fred Ford. He would just love at some point to connect with the Memphis music scene, as he now lives in New York, but his musical roots are from Memphis. And I've got his email that I'll pass along to you guys.
I would love that. Bobby Lavelle, I've met Bobby Lavelle, and Honeymoon and I were great friends, as was Fred Ford and I. In fact, the book ends with Fred Ford's funeral. So Bobby, absolutely get in touch with me. I'll get in touch with you. And I remember we did a show together at the Overton Park show, as I recall.
Yeah, David, I'd like to connect. If all of us could connect, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to know more.
Okay.
Make sure you guys get that info. And that'll about do it. It is 7, and I thank you guys so much. This was really amazing. And I hope we get to do it again. I hope we'll be able to do this in person at some point. Maybe next year, another year, who knows. But I appreciate all of you being with us. You can all head to novelmemphis.com to purchase the book. David will be stopping back by if you want personalized copies of the book. And we have some that are just autographed at the store if you want to stop by and pick them up. But I really appreciate all of you being with us, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Congratulations, David. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.